Welcome to the show, everyone. As you can see, I am joined by Professor Mohammed Marandi, and we are going to cover the latest developments in the Iran war. To begin, I wanted to pull up the latest news from the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to be troubling, especially for the United States. They have been running, according to some reports, they've been running a military operation to escort ships in the Strait of Hormuz, but through the Omani pathway, through the Omani route. Unfortunately, they've only been able to escort two of these vessels in the last 24 to 36 hours, a Greek bulk carrier and another outbound tanker hugging the Omani coast. Now, these are getting air cover and in some forms, ship cover, warship cover. But the big news is that far more vessels, Professor Marandi, are being turned back by Iranian warnings. And this contradicts reports that there is something between 20 to 30 vessels or so coming out of the Strait of Hormuz under U.S. escort from Axios. Now, this seems to indicate that Iran is repelling any attempt by the United States to break Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. What are your thoughts on this? This is coming on July 4th on the funeral as Pete Hegseth has gone quiet. It seems like Donald Trump's admission that there's going to be relative quiet has a lot to do with Iranian strength and less so to do with the United States being benevolent. What's your thoughts on what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz in particular? As you've said on the show, time seems to be ticking.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure. I apologize for the noise, but I'm at a studio, and I have a show on I'm on a show on Al Mayadeen TV later, so I had to do it from here. And it's back in the background. That's where the complex, the Musalla, where the bodies of the martyrs, Ayatollah Khamenei, his granddaughter, his daughter, and one of his son-in-laws were. That's where their bodies were taken, and people went there for the prayers, and we had millions of people participate this morning. It was so crowded that I couldn't make it. I mean, I left home about almost 3 hours early, and I went to this. I was in a place where hundreds of thousands of people. None of us could reach the point where the place where they're carrying out the prayer. So it was so massive that many of us couldn't make it. So tiring. When I got home, I had to sleep for a couple of hours. But the situation in the Persian Gulf is just one of those forever violations carried out by the United States with regard to its commitments. The MOU that was signed between Iran and the United States is clear that during the period when the MOU is being carried out, that is being implemented, the Iranians control the Strait of Hormuz. And yet the Americans have been setting up during the last few days a corridor through Omani territorial waters, or through an Omani corridor, in order to circumvent Iranian control. And that's what they've been doing with Lebanon too. The agreement between Iran and the United States is very clear that the Israeli regime must leave Lebanon, and that its territorial integrity must be respected, and the war must end. And then the Americans went and signed this MOU with the Israeli regime and the puppet government in Beirut, where basically they gifted southern Lebanon to the Israeli regime to do whatever they want. And Iran is saying, we're not going to have any of that. We won't accept violations. If you carry out violations, then we will not abide by our commitments, whether it's with regards to the nuclear negotiations that the Iranians are not starting until the issue of Lebanon is resolved, and other issues as well. But also the Strait of Hormuz is not going to be normalized when the Americans violate their commitment. So the Americans are trying to escort ships through the strait in violation of the agreement. But what they're doing basically is they're going to force Iran to push back. And in the agreement, the first month, after the first month ends, we're supposed to have normal passage through the strait, which will be like before the war started. In other words, the number of ships will go back to what it was 4 or 5 months ago. But when the Americans are violating the agreement now, then there's no reason why the Iranians during the second month would normalize the number of ships that flow through the strait. So the Americans are hurting themselves. And the reason why they're doing it is because of the Israeli regime, because of the Zionist lobby. The Israeli regime, the Zionist lobby, wants to make sure that tensions between Iran and the United States remain high in the hope that they can restart the war later on down the road. But this is not going to intimidate the Iranians. And as we saw, I mean, I'm sure many of your viewers have seen the millions of people on the streets of Tehran. The resolve of the Iranian people is clear. The amount of, the high degree of legitimacy of the state in Iran, I think, is, in Western media can no longer question it. Western think tanks, for years, they've been saying that the Islamic Republic of Iran is unpopular, it's hated by the people, it's incompetent, it's corrupt, it's imploding. And those fake narratives produced by their think tankers, Western media, their books, their published books. I mean, you rarely find anything worth reading about Iran in the United States, and that's why I said, like Alistair Crook's book, Resistance is good to read, or Going to Tehran by Flint and Hilary Lever. These are really good books, or A Dangerous Delusion by Peter Oborn. These are, among the rare books that people can go buy and read and learn something about Iran that's objective. So, for decades they've been saying that this regime is on the verge of collapse, and they love using the word regime. But now we saw they've lost 2 wars last year, this year. They lost the siege warfare. They lost at the negotiating table. The MOU clearly shows that Iran had the upper hand. But the funeral today, the processions yesterday, today, and tomorrow show how popular Ayatollah Khamenei was in the eyes of ordinary Iranians. He was far more than just like a religious figure, let's say the Pope. He was a revolutionary, an anti-imperialist, a highest-ranking religious figure, and Iran being one of the most highly educated societies in the world, millions of people, educated Iranians, went to the streets to commemorate him and to show their support for the Islamic Republic. So you would imagine that the United States and analysts in the United States and so-called experts in the United States would look and say, okay, let's rethink our policy on Iran and behave in a more sane manner and stop trying to undermine the country, but it's because it clearly doesn't work. But that's not what they're going to do. They'll never learn. Even though many across the world are now waking up to the reality of what goes on in Iran. But at the end of the day, those policymakers in the United States, those so-called experts, those analysts, and the politicians, they're going to remain the same as always. They'll never change. So the tensions that exist in the Persian Gulf, I mean, the Americans may be able to get some ships out through a mechanism which violates the deal, but ultimately they undermine themselves because the Iranians are not going to abide by their side of the bargain as a result.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening for Samardi, and definitely we will spend a good amount of this show on this historic gathering at the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Before that, I just want to underscore utterly wasteful and ultimately, as you said, just hurts the United States the more that they invest in this kind of scheme. First, it was that 2 U.S. officials told Mr. 8200, Unit 8200 Barak Ravid at Axios that around 50 vessels were using, with their transponders turned up, this Omani corridor that has at times U.S. air and even warship escort. But there is maritime traffic data that actually does contradict this. Only a few were able to get out using this route, and that as many as 8 vessels, so 4 times the number of vessels, had to go backwards. So that's a lot of resources to violate this deal, and also to essentially not actually generate more activity through the Strait of Hormuz, to force it through. And of course, you have the fact that Iran and Oman have come to this agreement that says there will be joint control, and it will include fees, and it won't include the United States. So the U.S. is only making itself out, it seems, for Irani to be not only an untrustworthy partner, but one that must be excluded at all costs from here on out. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, the United States is constantly threatening Oman. And if you recall, 2-3 weeks ago, Trump said, if we have to, we'll destroy Oman, bomb Oman, and whatever. And that's just the mentality of Washington, and it's all normal. I mean, even Trump's opponents, when he threatens to obliterate Iran or to bomb Oman, a U.S. ally of, or when he says he'll wipe out a civilization, it doesn't register any in the West, and that just shows that this is not just Trump. This is not just like uh, the psychopath, half insane psychopath ranting. It's the entire political class that deems this sort of behavior and this sort of language to be acceptable. There's no outrage, just as there was no outrage in European capitals or in their parliaments when they bombed the Iranian elementary school and slaughtered 168 children. There's no outrage at all with regards to this language. So he threatens Oman, and there's hardly any reaction in the West. But Oman is intimidated by the United States. It wants to have this joint control over the Strait of Hormuz, but it's sort of dragging its feet now because of the pressure coming from Washington. But the Iranians have said to Oman, and they've said in public, that if Oman wants to be a part of this, we'll be happy to do it with them. But if Oman, for whatever reason, gets cold feet and backs down or walks away, the Iranians will do it on their own. So it's not as if they're going to relinquish control. They're saying either you will be our partner, but if you're intimidated and you can't, then we'll do it alone.
And lastly, before we move on to the funeral, Professor Randi, one of the big unspoken reports, or at least undercover reports, is that in the structure, the fee structure that will exist in the Strait of Hormuz from here on out, run by Iran and in part Oman, if they actually agree, Iran will actually be giving friendly countries special considerations, they're saying, which means there could be a waiver of this fee and other special considerations given to countries like China, which of course has provided Iran with 90% of Iran's oil exports in recent years. So talk about this. Why is it significant? Because it really does send a message. And what kind of message is that?
Well, preferential treatment is directed towards countries that are friendly to Iran. Either they'll give them discounts or maybe waive fees at times. I don't know, but it will be different for different countries. And I mean, why not? The United States, during the past 47 years, has attacked Iran 3 times. Waged 3 wars against the country. In 1980, they encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade. They, in Western countries, gave Saddam chemical weapons to use against his own people and against Iranians. Then, in last year, another war was waged. This year, a 3rd war. This year, a massive war against Iran. Americans brought everything they had, and NATO was helping them, as we heard the Secretary General admit that when he was licking Trump's boots, he actually made that admission. And so 3 wars were waged. Why should Iran give NATO countries or countries in the region that assisted the United States preferential treatment? Why should they give Kuwait preferential treatment? But countries that have had no part to play in this role or have good relations with Iran, like China, obviously preferential treatment makes sense. So when you treat a people poorly, when you murder children, when they slaughter kids, when they bomb hospitals, when they bomb schools, there's no reason to give them preferential treatment. When the West, like when the Germans say that Israel does our dirty work for us in Iran, why should Iran give the Germans preferential treatment? They have to pay for their insolence and their insults and their support for death and destruction and murder and genocide. So I think it's only natural when a country like China hasn't waged war against any country for decades, whereas the United States has been carrying out endless wars with the support of its allies and proxies, there's going to be a difference. And that difference will have an impact on their economies, and is going to have an impact on their presence in our region. But it's not Iran's fault that the United States and the Europeans behave this way. It's not Iran's fault that regional regimes have assisted the United States in assaulting the country.
Well, now let's get to this historic gathering at the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and there are also, I believe, at least 60 other Iranian officials and their family members. We have to remember their family members were also targeted in those horrific decapitation strikes. The gathering is massive, Professor Marty, as you obviously know in your failed attempts to spend much time amongst the crowd. But
Oh,
I'll just
I
show
was
up.
among the crowd for hours, but I just couldn't get to where they were carrying out the prayer.
Yeah, you couldn't get there. Yeah, the estimates are 9 million people have attended already. This, of course,
A few hours ago.
Right, exactly. So there's many days left. Mainstream media is talking about huge crowds. Trump is shocked by how many people have come. He said that maybe they're fake tears because he didn't know how it could be that Iranians were so sad that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed, because he thought it was the opposite. Talk about especially Iran. You've mentioned on this show and other programs, Iranians having an understandable desire for revenge. The Strait of Hormuz activity, the increased power that Iran has on the world stage, that in part I could see satisfying Iranians who are just absolutely incensed with the war criminal and treatment by the U.S. and Israel. But what's the mood like, and how would you characterize what's going on at this funeral and its significance?
Well, a lot of people have been showing their emotions. It's very emotional. Lots of people were weeping during the prayers this morning, even though me and where I was, hundreds of thousands of people couldn't get to the prayers, but you could, when they were listening in on the prayers, there was lots of weeping. And obviously, Trump can't comprehend this, because when he finally kicks the bucket, I don't think any of his kids are going to cry for him. So, I mean, these people have no understanding or comprehension of emotions and true emotions, and honor and friendship and dignity and morality. So of course it's beyond his mental capabilities, but also it just shows that how U.S. intelligence misinforms the regime. I mean, someone could they say that Trump does not intelligence reports. Fine, but the head of the CIA, senior intelligence officials do meet Trump, and I'm sure they do give him some idea of what they think about what goes on in Iran. So if Trump is shocked about the massive crowds in Tehran and the emotions of the people, that shows that U.S. intelligence agencies are either lying to Trump, or they are trapped in their own propaganda model. And of course, it's not just the intelligence agencies. We've seen for decades, and we've discussed this many times, and earlier, that media, think tanks, the so-called experts, those who write books on Iran, they repeat these narratives, these fake narratives on Iran. And so almost all the books that you read on Iran in the United States are simply not worth it. Or reading newspapers, or back then, websites, Telegram channels, and articles on Iran, or going to think tanks and looking at their material. It's literally almost worthless reading this material, because it misleads you. So whether it's the intelligence agencies or the public discourse of the Epstein class, through the media, the mainstream media, through the think tanks and the regime itself, the image, their understanding of Iran is always warped. It's always it has nothing. It has very little to do with reality. So he would conclude that Ayatollah Khamenei is disliked by the people, because that's what you're supposed to conclude when you watch CNN or Fox News. It doesn't matter. When you watch the BBC or Sky News, there's no difference. When you read the New York Times or Breitbart, again, it doesn't matter. One may be more sophisticated, more subtle. The other may be more bombastic, but they're basically all the same. And again, it's because they all belong to the same class. But the problem is that it doesn't matter if they hate Iran or they misread Iran. The problem is that they go and devise policies, and then implement those policies and hit a brick wall. That has serious repercussions. That has implications. It's like the war itself. It costs, probably directly and indirectly, trillions of dollars. I mean, because it's still ongoing. But that is the result of their misreading of Iran. So their propaganda model, their narratives on Iran, at one level they just create a false understanding of Iran. But at a much more important level, it is actually very costly for the American people and for the Iranians, because then they go and murder Iranian children and Iranian citizens in the hope that they can overthrow the state. And then we see the scenes in Tehran that we saw today in response.
Yeah, great points, Professor Randi. Now, I wanted to pull this up. It's from Drop Site News.
By the way, Danny, I'm trying to speak loud because of the background noise.
Yeah.
I hope it's okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's going well. I think it's going well. In chat, you can help assure Professor Morandi that it's going well, because I think we can all hear you. I haven't heard anything, or I've been able to hear, and I haven't seen anything either. So I wanted to just pull up something from Drop Site News that has the full extent of Donald Trump's reactions to the funeral. He said he was surprised so many Iranians were crying because he thought people hated Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He said maybe it's fake tears, but he also said this, and another violation of the MOU. They are all there. One shot and we can take them all out. But we aren't going to do that because then we have nobody to negotiate with. And here are some of the scenes that came out from the early hours of the public gathering of Iranians, because I know the first is mainly officials, which I also want your comment on, because there was a Saudi delegation. Some speculated they weren't invited, but they came based on their own, I guess you could say, goodwill. The UAE did not attend. They held their own July 4th ceremony, which I guess shows a lot there. But a very, I guess there's a lot of also politics surrounding the funeral, and I wonder if you could comment on, first, Trump violating the MOU by making these threats. You earlier, there were reports about something that you talked about on this show, the threats of a decapitation strike during negotiations, which almost happened at Islamabad, which you were a part of. I mean, there's a whole thread here, Professor Morandi. Help us unwind it a bit.
Well, there are a number of things. One is that this just shows how monstrous the regime is, the U.S. regime. And because Trump is threatening to murder Iranian leaders and thousands of Iranians simultaneously by bombing the funeral. But what is even more monstrous is that American media, Western media, European MPs, parliamentarians, governments, they show absolutely no reaction at all, to the threat of mass slaughter. Since the leaders are there, let's just fire missiles and kill thousands of people so we can take out a few people. This is how evil the political class is in the United States. And when one thinks about it, it's quite stunning. They're talking about the sort of things that the Israeli regime does on a daily basis, but it just shows how normal it has become for them. Not even the fake political correctness of the past is even considered anymore. So that's one thing. It says more about the political establishment across Western countries than it says about Trump himself. With regards to the threats that he's made in the past, you saw the New York Times and the Washington Post claim that the United States informed the Iranians that the Israelis want to carry on a strike. That is absolutely false. I was on that plane. When we went from Tehran to Islamabad. It was around that time, I don't recall when exactly, that the Washington Post put out an article, put an opinion piece saying that they should murder the Iranian negotiators. And we all saw that when we were in Islamabad. And on the other hand, the Islamabad talks failed, right? We saw Vance constantly on the phone. The Iranians were negotiating, but his minders, Witkoff and Kushner, were sitting there and had to call Netanyahu and others, and ultimately nothing happened. So when they walked away, the Iranians themselves said that we have to devise a way to protect the delegation. And they changed the plane, and I don't want to go into great detail, but they changed the plane, and the Pakistani Air Force jets accompanied the plane to the border. And then they landed near in Mashhad, which is, I think we discussed this once before in the show, near the border with Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, to the northeast of Iran. Why? Because it's far away from Israel. The Israeli regime doesn't have the ability to bomb Iran. Whenever they carry out these airstrikes, it's because American planes refuel their jets. Planes that take off from Qatar or Saudi Arabia or Jordan, they refuel them so they can come. But Mashhad is even further away. So if the Americans and the Israelis wanted to strike, they'd have to go very deep into Iran, it was more difficult. So when they entered Iranian airspace, they swiftly shifted direction, went towards Mashhad, and quickly landed. And we quickly left the plane, and we returned to Tehran by land. There was no intelligence from the United States given to the Iranians, directly or indirectly, at all. And this was just an Iranian uh, measure taken to protect the delegation. And to the credit of everyone who was on the plane, on the delegation, when we were in Pakistan, not a single person said they want to stay behind. Stay for a couple of extra days, come by land, take a different flight, whatever. We had young women as well, journalists with us. They boarded the plane just like the rest of us. So we all returned on the flight despite the threats. And of course, we know that the Washington Post is closely affiliated to the CIA. So when you have an opinion piece in the Washington Post, you take it seriously. Then, of course, he's been threatening Iranian negotiators since then as well. When during the recent negotiations in Europe, he threatened the negotiators. He said they'll never get back to Iran. He threatened the president. He threatened again to wipe out Iran. And of course, met with complete indifference in Western media, Western capitals, and Western parliaments, just like this latest threat again, where he said we could take.
Oh, Professor Marty, it looks like we might have lost you for a second. In any event, I'll just wait until you're able to come back.
Well, to do it. Okay, am I back?
Yeah. Please continue on your last thought.
Yes, is the quality okay?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, someone called. That's why I got cut off.
No, it's okay.
So he again, he made these threats, and today, or the threats that you read, I don't know if they were today or yesterday. I think they were yesterday, but that he could take them all, he could kill them all, and kill thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people in the process, which is all fine. But the problem is that there will be no negotiators. So this is the mentality that we're dealing with in the West: genocidal, openly genocidal, and no protests. You don't see any Greek parliamentarians putting out statements condemning Trump. You don't see any Norwegian parliamentarians making statements about, how Trump is, what he says is outrageous. You don't see the French parliament or the German. None of them say anything. The New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they're all, it's fine. It's fine. Threatening to massacre Iranians is fine. But Iranians know about these threats, yet they still come to the streets.
Yep.
They know that there's a threat of airstrikes on the funeral procession because they talk about it on social media. But people come and they defy the threats, and of course that a lot of it has to do with Iran's religious culture. We've discussed this before. The Shia culture in particular gives there's a certain resilience, there's a certain inner strength that comes from, and I think Alistair Crook's book, Resistance, gives an idea of this, and also perhaps I think also in going to Tehran, when people read it, it helps them have a better understanding. So there is this sense of defiance that is created, that exists among Iranians and the Lebanese and the Ansar Allah, which is quite unique.
Yeah, it's definitely unique. I mean, Iranians have been doing this since the beginning of the war. They rallied every single day in the thousands upon thousands, millions, every day, cheering on their forces, defending themselves, and of course, condemning the United States and Israel. So I wanted to pull up actually just a few. There's definitely a psychological operation. We usually almost always in the second half of our program, so the other Professor Randi, always end up talking about these psychological operations. Here's one that you reposted by Reuters, talking about how Iran is mobilizing millions to mourn right now. But when Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's death was announced, residents were reported cheering from behind windows across Tehran. The funeral starts today. So this was a little promo for their funeral, which was, of course, absolutely unreadable and not worth the salt, but any salt. But Professor Radi, your reactions to this? This is how all Iran and any country targeted by the United States for war, this is how their mainstream media handlers, their mouthpieces, always frame things, right? They're forced. The millions are forced to go. They're being mobilized to go out there.
Mobilize millions. Like how do you mobilize them? How do you count them? How do you do they come to the streets and give their names to the local boss, and I mean, how does it work? Like in a city like Tehran, a mega city, and where we had just you have to find a way just to get to the place, to the ceremony, and get through all the traffic. And so, like, how does that work? How are we mobilized? And then, like, how do they when we come, like, we're among millions of other people, how do they find us? How do they know we're here? How do they know? And then how do they? And if we're, it's like, it's just completely ridiculous. And then all these people, they're like cheering his dad behind closed windows. How do you know that? So how does that? How do you? What does that mean?
Superior
shows,
intel.
It just shows that Western media is fake. It's propaganda. It's worse in many ways, in my opinion, than the worst of the Soviet Union, because it tries to present this aura of independence. It's not independent. They're all owned by oligarchs, but it's not government. It's privately owned, so somehow that makes a difference. But they're all the same. I always tell people never follow Reuters or the BBC or CNN or any of these outlets. I don't follow any of them. I get my information from people who I follow, reliable media outlets, with reliable journalists, and like the people who I follow on Twitter. I mean, there are lots of people I don't follow, but it's just because I'm not a Twitter person. I don't remember to follow people who. I mean, there are lots of people who I'm not following or absolutely excellent, but I'm just not a Twitter person. So I apologize to many people I'm not following, but the people I follow, for the most part, they're very good.
Yeah, well, if there's any entity, political entity in the world right now that needs to be whitewashed, it's Israel. They need. I don't know how they can accomplish such a thing, but I guess the desperation is definitely there for that.
Yes.
We have a question from the audience, Professor Varadi, from Selma, asking, what do you see happening post-war now that Iran sees that many are on their side? FM, the foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has internet aura. There's love for the Iranian soccer team. Do you see Iran opening up more, or that there'll be any internal changes because of this shift?
For what?
Any internal changes? I don't know what that's referring to, but your thoughts.
Well, Iran has always been a very dynamic country. Contrary to what we hear in the West, we have regular elections. We have many differences in the country that are expressed very openly. Even over the MOU, there's a huge debate going on in Iran. And when yesterday and today, when I was on the streets, a lot of people would approach me, falsely thinking that some of them, that I'm a negotiator. I have nothing to do with the negotiating team. I don't support any political faction in Iran or any political party. I sometimes agree with A, sometimes with B. So over the last 2 days, a lot of people have approached me to talk about the MOU. Many of them support it. Many of them are worried about it, and a couple were very hostile towards it, and they were pretty hostile towards me, thinking that I had something to do with it. But on the whole, so you have these very, you always have robust debates going on campus, in the media, on the streets. Iranians are very. What would be the word? They interact very easily. If you get on a bus and speak to the person next to you, he or she will probably speak with you. If you get on a metro and someone may start speaking with you, or in a taxi, the driver, or they'll start speaking. That's part of Iranian culture, which I like. And you always see that people are grumbling or angry or criticizing. So, and we've had different governments. The policies of the current president are not the same as Dr. Raisi. I mean, there is a lot of overlap, obviously, but there are significant differences. And the government before the marcher of President Raisi, the former President Raisi, the late President Raisi, was very different from his government. So you have all these debates going on in Iran. It's a very dynamic country. And obviously, it will continue to evolve. And the more confident the country becomes, I think, hopefully in the months and years ahead, because of its victory in this war, this funeral itself is a show of strength and power. I think the more confident it becomes, the more I think it will be able to evolve in a positive way, to be more confident about its position in the world. But I mean, if you wish to visit Iran, I think you would probably find it to be a very enjoyable place to be in. I I I cannot think of another country that I'd like to live in.
Hmm.
I mean, if I wasn't in Iran, I'd like to be in Lebanon or in Yemen or somewhere like that because of my worldview. But I like it very much being.
Do you view that Netanyahu, a lot of people are speculating that he's going to come to the White House and attempt to convince Donald Trump to go back to war? Do you think that's what's going to happen? And is there any possibility of that succeeding? We have no words coming out of Pete Hegseth's mouth right now, which is actually quite shocking, given that he almost seems to run some of the social media accounts of the White House. But your thoughts on this? A lot of people are saying that it could be that every time Netanyahu meets with Trump, something bad happens.
Well, Iran has been preparing itself for war since the ceasefire and since the MOU. When they signed the MOU, the Iranians were able to export a large number of tankers, send a large number of tankers to their markets in Asia, as we discussed before. And they are buying supplies, they are expanding their underground missile bases, drone bases, their production of newer and more advanced missiles and drones, replacing the thousands of destroyed um, decoys that the Americans and the Israelis foolishly bombed. And they're preparing themselves for war. They're doing it very swiftly. And as we discussed before, Iran is more prepared for war today than it was 4 months ago, significantly more prepared. So I think that the chance for further conflict is not low. I would never bet it. I mean, not betting man, but I would never bet against war. I mean, the Zionists want war. They're desperate for war. And the Zionist lobby in the United States hasn't changed in nature. So I think that the chance for war is not low. It would be disastrous for the United States. It would be far worse than this war. They will not win against Iran. But the global economy, which is in bad shape, would collapse. I mean, it will take a very, very long time for the shortages that now exist across the world to be dealt with and to bring those shortages to an end. War with Iran would just make things go downhill very fast. The global economy is not doing well. The shortages are there. The shortages are growing. I mean, when it comes to oil, crude oil, significant quantities are being exported from the Persian Gulf. Not as much when you even if you include Fujairah and the Red Sea, not as much as before the war. But the other products are not being exported in large quantities. Fertilizers, helium, and all the other petrochemical goods. And this is going to have a huge impact on the global economy. So if there's war, it's going to be disastrous for the United States and the world. But it's possible, because that's what the Israeli regime wants, that's what Netanyahu wants, that's what the Zionists want. And you can never rule out this sort of thing. And the way in which the Americans are behaving with regards to the MOU, violations as wherever possible. And of course, as I said, the Iranians reacting by not implementing the deal in their own way. Everything, you shouldn't expect things to get better.
And then finally, maybe
I'm not saying there will be war, because if they're sane people in the White House, they will say this is not the way to go. And Israel on its own cannot wage a war against Iran. They'll be defeated very easily. Unless the Americans get involved, they'll still be defeated. But as I said earlier, they need U.S. weapons, they need U.S. ammunition, they need U.S. support, and they need U.S. planes to refuel their jets. Otherwise, they can't bomb Iran.
Yeah. And perhaps lastly, Professor Rada, your comment on the state of the region more broadly outside of Israel and U.S. aggression. At the funeral so far, you had the UAE skipping out. They of course were not invited, I don't believe. But nonetheless, they had a July 4th celebration flyover using some of those U.S. Navy Blue Angels flying over their sky. And then you had Saudi Arabia. They had a delegation that did go to Iran and did participate in the ceremony that was dedicated, I think, to or resigned for officials. What's your thoughts on this kind of participation and the regional situation overall? As you know, there's some reports that Saudi Arabia and Yemen, they might be getting into a renewed war. Of course, there's been talks about the situation in Iraq. Your thoughts on the state of the region overall, given these developments?
Well, you basically point out why it's very difficult to say anything conclusively. The Iranians have broken the siege on Yemen, which is a big thing. 2 Iranian planes, if I'm not mistaken, have landed in Sana'a airport in Yemen, the capital of Yemen. And the Saudis apparently, the first plane, the Saudis tried to block it from landing, but Yemeni air defenses forced the Saudi jets to leave, and the Iranian plane landed. So these 2 planes are landing are very important. It shows that things are changing. But then the very fact that the Saudis were trying to harass an Iranian passenger plane is not a good sign itself. And so on the one hand, the Saudis send a delegation to Tehran. People in Tehran, they know that the Saudis, everyone knows that the Saudis helped kill lots of Iranians and that all these regimes were involved. But the fact that they came shows that on the one hand that the Saudis want to change the nature of the relationship. But then in Yemen, we see them behaving in that manner. So it's very difficult to say where things will go. And ultimately, Trump and Netanyahu, they will do whatever they can to increase tensions. In fact, in one of the meetings that the Iranians had with the Emiratis themselves were saying that the Israelis are doing whatever they can to wreck the relationship between Iran and the UAE. But the irony is that while they say that themselves to the Iranians, they continue to remain allies of the Israeli regime. This is, there are so many paradoxes in the Arabian Peninsula. There's so many contradictory actions and statements and the behavior. And then you have the Americans and the Israelis. It's very difficult to say what will happen down the road. But there's no doubt that the Israeli regime is on the decline, the empire is on the decline, and the resistance, Iran, is on the rise. No matter how you look at it, that's what's happened and will continue to happen. There will be confrontation and conflict and intimidation by the empire in the months ahead and years ahead, and the genocide in Gaza will continue. They're killing people every single day. They've killed people today and yesterday, and of course, if they can, they'll start killing more people in Lebanon. But of course, Netanyahu's hands are somewhat tied in Lebanon. But they'll do these things if they can. So we shouldn't be naive about the future. The empire is not dead. It is dying, but it is a wounded animal that is very dangerous and vicious.
Very well said, Professor Mohammad Marandi, everybody. Joining us from Iran, joining us from just outside of the massive funeral gathering and ceremony for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the slain officials, Iranian officials and their families in those February 28th strikes. Professor Marandi, we'll head out of here together. Any final thoughts? As I said, everyone hit the like button. Thanks everyone who gave a super chat. And of course, thanks to all the moderators. But any final thoughts to the audience for you before we head out of here?
People should keep trying to raise awareness about Palestine, about Gaza. The genocide is ongoing; it's nonstop, and the governments in the region, they're indifferent. They're collaborating. So it's the responsibility of every one of us to keep people awake. The same is true with Lebanon, but what's going on in Gaza right now is really, really bad. It's very brutal, and they're slaughtering people every single day.
Yeah, definitely. Let's keep making sure we give attention to that. Everybody, you heard Professor Marandi. Hit that like button before you go. That helps boost the show in YouTube's algorithm. I will be back tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Time with Andrei Martyanov. Until next time on July 6th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll see you next time and hit that like button. Thanks to all who viewed. Bye bye.